In a quiet Orlando neighborhood on a December night in 2016, a 911 dispatcher received a call that would send shockwaves through Central Florida. The voice on the other end was frantic, screaming that someone had been shot. Multiple gunshots had shattered the peaceful evening in the Pine Hills community. When officers arrived at the Williams family home, they found a scene that would haunt investigators for years to come. A young mother lay motionless in front of her parents' house. She was 24 years old, she was pregnant, and she had just told her ex-boyfriend that their relationship was over. This is the story of Keisha Williams, a hard-working mother of two who dreamed of building a better life for her children. But when she tried to escape a toxic relationship, her decision would cost her everything. The man she once trusted would become her killer, setting off a manhunt that would claim even more lives and expose the deadly reality of domestic violence in America. What you're about to hear is based on court documents, police records, witness testimonies, and interviews with those who knew Keisha Williams. This is her story. Before we dive deeper, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you, and if you're new here, click on the subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. December 2016, Orlando, Florida. The holiday season was in full swing. Families were decorating their homes, children were counting down the days to Christmas, and the city was buzzing with that familiar, festive energy. But in the Pine Hills neighborhood, 24-year-old Keisha Williams wasn't feeling the holiday spirit. She had just made one of the hardest decisions of her life. After 3 months of dating 41-year-old Marcus Johnson, she had moved back in with her parents. Keisha was the kind of woman everyone remembered, hard-working, dedicated, strong-minded. Her parents, Denise and Robert Williams, described her as phenomenal. She had 2 young children, an 8-year-old and a 2-year-old, and she worked tirelessly to provide for them. She was the kind of mother who put her kids first, always. When Keisha met Marcus Johnson in September 2016, he seemed charming at first. He came to family dinners. He met Keisha's parents multiple times. On the surface, things looked normal, but behind closed doors, a different reality was unfolding. Keisha was 3 months pregnant with Marcus's child, and the relationship was already showing signs of serious trouble. By early December, just 3 months after they'd started dating, Keisha knew she had to leave. She didn't tell her family all the details at first. She just showed up at their door on December 10th, asking if she could move back in. But there was one detail she couldn't hide. During a physical altercation with Marcus, he had bitten her on the back so hard that she had to go to the doctor and get a tetanus shot. Think about that for a moment. A grown man biting a woman hard enough that she needs medical treatment. That's not just an argument. That's violence. That's control. That's abuse. Keisha's family welcomed her back without hesitation. They could see she needed help, and they were there for her. For 3 days, Keisha stayed with her parents, trying to figure out her next steps. She had her 2 children to think about. She had another baby on the way. She needed safety, stability, and space. But Marcus Johnson wasn't willing to give her any of those things. In relationships marked by domestic violence, the most dangerous time for a victim is when they try to leave. Studies show that leaving an abusive partner increases the risk of homicide by 75%. Keisha Williams didn't know these statistics. She just knew she needed to get away. But Marcus Johnson had other plans. December 13th, 2016. A Tuesday evening. The sun had set over Orlando, and the Williams family was settling in for the night. Keisha's 2 children were inside the house with their grandparents. Her 26-year-old brother, Terrell, was also home. It was supposed to be a quiet night, but at approximately 9:15 p.m., there was a knock at the door. Keisha answered. It was Marcus. He wanted to talk. Keisha, trying to handle the situation calmly, agreed to speak with him outside. She probably thought she could reason with him, explain that their relationship was over, maybe come to some kind of understanding about the baby she was carrying. She stepped outside her parents' front door, and in that moment, everything changed. Witnesses in the neighborhood heard the first gunshot, then another, and another. Approximately 10 shots rang out in total, shattering the peaceful evening. Inside the house, Terrell heard the commotion. He rushed outside to help his sister. But when he got to the door, Marcus Johnson turned the gun on him and fired. Terrell was shot but survived. He would later testify about what he witnessed that night. Keisha Williams wasn't as fortunate. According to the medical examiner's report, she was shot 8 times. 8 times. Marcus Johnson stood there and fired 8 bullets into the woman who was carrying his child. She was pronounced dead at the scene. Her unborn baby died with her. Inside the house, Keisha's 2 children had just lost their mother. When the Orange County Sheriff's deputies arrived, they found a horrific scene. Bullet holes riddled the front of the Williams family home. Keisha's body lay outside. Terrell was critically wounded but alive, and Marcus Johnson was gone. He had fled into the night, disappearing into the sprawl of Central Florida. Authorities immediately issued a warrant for his arrest, charging him with 2 counts of first-degree murder for Keisha and her unborn child, 2 counts of aggravated assault with a firearm, and 1 count of attempted murder for the shooting of Terrell. He was considered armed and dangerous. A manhunt began, but Marcus Johnson had vanished. The Williams family was shattered. On December 14th, just 1 day after Keisha's murder, her parents held a news conference. Denise and Robert Williams stood before cameras and reporters, their grief visible on their faces, and made a public plea. They urged Marcus Johnson to turn himself in. They described their daughter as a phenomenal woman who was hardworking, dedicated, unique, and strong-minded. They talked about her love for her children. They talked about the life she had ahead of her, and they begged for an end to the violence. Denise Williams said that retaliation wouldn't bring Keisha back. She called for peace. But Marcus Johnson wasn't listening. For the next 4 weeks, he remained on the run. Police received hundreds of tips. They searched neighborhoods across Orlando. They interviewed friends, family members, anyone who might know where he was hiding. But Johnson was resourceful. He was staying off the grid, moving from place to place, evading capture. As Christmas came and went, the Williams family buried Keisha and her unborn child. A vigil was held in her memory. Friends and neighbors released purple balloons into the sky. Keisha's 2 children were left to try to understand why their mother wasn't coming home, and all across Central Florida, people were asking the same question: where is Marcus Johnson? The answer would come in the most tragic way possible, because Marcus Johnson's story wasn't over, and more lives were about to be lost. January 9th, 2017. Almost 4 weeks had passed since Keisha Williams's murder. It was a Monday morning, around 7:15 a.m., and the city of Orlando was just waking up. At a Walmart supercenter on John Young Parkway in the Pine Hills area, shoppers were starting their day. Among them was Orlando Police Lieutenant Patricia Hayes. Hayes wasn't on duty at the store, she was just shopping. But she was about to make a split-second decision that would change everything. A woman in the store recognized a man standing in the checkout line. She knew his face from the news. She knew he was wanted for murder. She approached Lieutenant Hayes and told her. The man in line was Marcus Johnson. Lieutenant Patricia Hayes was 42 years old. She had served with the Orlando Police Department for 17 years. She was known as a dedicated officer, a master sergeant who had recently been promoted. She was a wife, a mother, and a respected member of the law enforcement community. When she learned that Marcus Johnson was in the store, she didn't hesitate. She pursued him. Johnson was wearing camouflage pants, black shoes, and a black shirt with the word security printed on it. He was also wearing a bulletproof vest, similar to those used by the Orlando Police Department. He was prepared for confrontation. As Lieutenant Hayes approached him, Johnson knew he was cornered. But instead of surrendering, he ran. Hayes chased him toward the parking lot. And then Marcus Johnson drew his weapon. According to police reports, Johnson fired 3 rounds at Lieutenant Hayes as she turned to run toward the parking lot. 1 bullet struck her in the right hip, causing her to fall forward and hit her face on the pavement. Even though she was wounded, Hayes managed to draw her service weapon and fire back. She got off 7 shots at Johnson, but Marcus Johnson circled around her as she lay on the ground, injured and vulnerable. He fired multiple more rounds. Lieutenant Hayes was hit 4 times in total, once in the hip, another bullet that shattered her hip bone, one in the thigh, and finally, a shot through her neck that lodged in her shoulder. According to the medical examiner, that final shot was fired while Marcus Johnson stood over her. He executed her in that Walmart parking lot. 3 officers who arrived on scene attempted CPR on Lieutenant Hayes while waiting for paramedics. She was rushed to Orlando Regional Medical Center, but the injuries were too severe. At 7:40 a.m., just 25 minutes after the shooting began, Lieutenant Patricia Hayes was pronounced dead. She left behind a husband and children. Her fellow officers were devastated. Orlando Police Chief stated that Hayes knew Johnson was wanted for Williams' murder and tried to arrest him, understanding the danger she was facing. She died a hero, trying to bring a killer to justice. After shooting Lieutenant Hayes, Marcus Johnson fled the Walmart parking lot. As he sped away, he fired shots at a deputy. Then he carjacked a vehicle at gunpoint, forcing the driver out. The car was later found abandoned, with Johnson's clothes inside. Evidence showed he had been shot in the chest during the exchange with Lieutenant Hayes, but his bulletproof vest had saved his life. Meanwhile, law enforcement launched one of the largest manhunts in Central Florida history. Every available officer was mobilized. Helicopters swept the area, roadblocks were set up, the entire region was on high alert. Marcus Johnson had now killed 3 people. He had shot Terrell Williams and fired at other officers. He was extremely dangerous, armed, and had nothing to lose. For 9 days, Marcus Johnson evaded one of the most extensive manhunts Florida had ever seen. But on January 17th, his time ran out. Acting on intelligence gathered from the hundreds of tips they had received, Orlando police surrounded an abandoned house in the Carver Shores neighborhood. They believed Marcus Johnson was inside, and they were right. When officers moved in, Johnson emerged from the house wearing full body armor and armed with 2 guns. One of those firearms had a 100-round capacity. He initially tried to escape through the back of the house, but he was completely surrounded. Realizing he had no way out, Johnson dropped his weapons at the front door and surrendered. Helicopter footage captured the moment. Johnson was seen crawling on his stomach toward officers, his hands visible. When Johnson was taken into custody, he was handcuffed using Lieutenant Patricia Hayes' handcuffs, a long-standing tradition in law enforcement to honor fallen officers. Marcus Johnson was taken to the hospital for treatment of facial injuries before being transferred to Orange County Jail. The 9-day manhunt was over. Marcus Johnson was in custody. But for the families of Keisha Williams and Lieutenant Patricia Hayes, the nightmare was just beginning to transform into a long wait for justice. Marcus Johnson was charged with 2 counts of first-degree murder with a firearm, 2 counts of aggravated assault with a firearm, and 1 count of attempted murder for the shooting of Terrell Williams. He was also charged with first-degree murder for killing Lieutenant Patricia Hayes. Additional charges included carjacking with a firearm and resisting arrest. The legal proceedings that followed would take years. The trial for Keisha Williams's murder began in October 2019, nearly 3 years after her death. Prosecutors presented a mountain of evidence. Forensic analysis showed that the .40 caliber pistol recovered from Johnson at his arrest was the same weapon used to kill Keisha Williams. Ballistics matched. Witnesses testified about hearing the gunshots that night. Terrell Williams, Keisha's brother who survived being shot, testified about what he saw. Medical examiners detailed the brutal nature of Keisha's injuries. She had been shot 8 times at close range. The defense tried to argue that Johnson was acting in self-defense and that he was insane at the time of the shooting. They claimed he suffered from mental health issues and delusional beliefs. After deliberating for less than 6 hours on October 22, 2019, the jury found Marcus Johnson guilty on all counts: first-degree murder for Keisha Williams, first-degree murder for killing their unborn child, attempted murder for shooting Terrell Williams, aggravated assault with a firearm. During the penalty phase, prosecutors argued for the death penalty, but the jury unanimously recommended life in prison instead of death. Judge Leticia Marquez followed the jury's recommendation and sentenced Marcus Johnson to life in prison without the possibility of parole. For the Williams family, it was a bittersweet moment. Justice had been served in some form, but it would never bring Keisha back. It would never give her children their mother. It would never let that unborn child take their first breath. But Marcus Johnson's legal battles weren't over. He still faced trial for the murder of Lieutenant Patricia Hayes. That trial began in November 2021, and the atmosphere was different. This time, prosecutors were seeking the death penalty for killing a law enforcement officer in the line of duty. The evidence was overwhelming. Multiple witnesses had seen the shooting in the Walmart parking lot. Security camera footage captured parts of the confrontation. Forensic evidence showed that Johnson had fired the fatal shots while standing over Lieutenant Hayes as she lay wounded on the ground. The same gun used to kill Keisha Williams was used to kill Lieutenant Hayes. One gun, 3 lives taken. In November 2021, the jury found him guilty of first-degree murder for killing Lieutenant Patricia Hayes. They also convicted him on additional charges related to the shooting and his subsequent flight from police. During the penalty phase in December 2021, the jury deliberated on whether Johnson should receive life in prison or the death penalty. This time, the jury was unanimous in a different way. They unanimously recommended death. On March 3, 2022, the judge held a sentencing hearing. The courtroom was packed with law enforcement officers, Lieutenant Hayes' family, and members of the community. When the judge announced the sentence, she followed the jury's recommendation. Marcus Johnson was sentenced to death for the murder of Orlando Police Lieutenant Patricia Hayes. Marcus Johnson was sent to Union Correctional Institution in Florida, where he currently sits on death row awaiting execution. His defense team has filed appeals, but as of now, the sentence stands. For many in the law enforcement community and the victims' families, the death sentence brought a sense of closure. But for others, including Keisha Williams's family, no sentence could ever be enough. In December 2017, 1 year after Keisha Williams's murder, her family held a vigil in her memory. They gathered in front of the Williams family home, the same place where Keisha had been killed. Her 2 children, now older, stood with their grandparents. They released purple balloons into the sky at exactly the time Keisha had been shot 1 year earlier. Denise Williams, Keisha's mother, spoke to reporters. "It hurts," she said. "It hurts because she should be here with us." The family announced they were launching a foundation in honor of Keisha, her unborn child, and all victims of domestic violence. The foundation's mission is to help women get out of dangerous relationships before it's too late. Think about what Keisha Williams's family has endured. They watched their daughter and sister be gunned down outside their home. They witnessed the shooting of Terrell, who barely survived. They've had to raise Keisha's 2 children, explaining to them why their mother is never coming home. They've had to live in a house still marked by bullet holes, a constant reminder of that terrible night. And they've had to watch years of court proceedings, reliving the trauma over and over again. That's the reality of domestic violence. It doesn't just destroy the victim. It destroys entire families. It leaves children without parents. It leaves parents burying their children. It creates trauma that lasts for generations. According to the National Coalition Against Domestic Violence, 1 in 4 women and 1 in 9 men experience severe intimate partner physical violence in their lifetime. On average, nearly 20 people per minute are physically abused by an intimate partner in the United States. That's more than 10 million women and men each year. And the most dangerous time for a domestic violence victim is when they're trying to leave. Studies show that 75% of domestic violence-related murders happen when the victim is trying to end the relationship or has recently left. Keisha Williams moved back in with her parents on December 10, 2016. 3 days later, on December 13th, she was dead. 3 days. She had 3 days of safety before Marcus Johnson showed up and took her life. The warning signs were there: the physical abuse, the bite that required medical treatment, the controlling behavior. But like so many victims, Keisha probably thought she could manage the situation, or maybe she didn't realize how dangerous Marcus Johnson really was until it was too late. Research shows that domestic violence typically escalates over time. It starts with verbal abuse and controlling behavior, then it progresses to physical violence, and in the worst cases, it ends in murder. When a gun is present in a domestic violence situation, the risk of homicide increases by 500%. Marcus Johnson used a .40 caliber pistol to kill Keisha Williams, shooting her 8 times. He used that same gun weeks later to kill Lieutenant Patricia Hayes. Here's something to think about. How many times have you heard about a domestic violence incident and thought, why didn't she just leave? Those kinds of responses put the blame on victims instead of perpetrators. They ignore the complex dynamics of abusive relationships. Victims stay for many reasons: financial dependence, fear of retaliation, concern for their children, hope that the abuser will change, lack of support systems, and most importantly, the knowledge that leaving is often the most dangerous time. Keisha Williams did leave. She moved back in with her parents. She ended the relationship. And she was murdered 3 days later. So please, if you take anything from this story, take this. Domestic violence is not a victim's fault. Ever. The only person responsible for violence is the person committing it. If you know someone in an abusive relationship, don't judge them for staying. Don't ask why they don't just leave. Instead, offer support. Let them know you're there. Help them make a safety plan. Connect them with resources like the National Domestic Violence Hotline. Let's remember who Keisha Williams was beyond being a victim. Keisha was 24 years old when she died. She had her whole life ahead of her. She was a mother who loved her 2 children fiercely. She was a daughter who her parents described as phenomenal. She was a sister. She was a friend. She was hardworking, dedicated, unique, and strong-minded. She was a woman with dreams, with hopes, with plans for the future. She was 3 months pregnant when she was killed. That baby never got a chance at life. Keisha's other 2 children grew up without their mother. That's the human cost of domestic violence. It's not just statistics. It's real people with real lives who are stolen from us. Lieutenant Patricia Hayes was 42 years old. She had served her community for 17 years. She was a wife and mother. She was known as a dedicated officer who cared about the people she protected. On January 9, 2017, she was just shopping at Walmart when she learned that a murder suspect was in the store. She could have waited for backup. She could have let him go and called it in. But that wasn't who Lieutenant Hayes was. She pursued Marcus Johnson because she knew he was dangerous and she wanted to protect her community. And it cost her her life. 2 people dead because one man refused to let a woman leave a relationship. Think about that. All of this started because Marcus Johnson couldn't accept that Keisha Williams was ending their 3-month relationship. 3 months. They had dated for 3 months. This is a question for all of you watching. If you were in Keisha Williams's position, if you were trying to leave a dangerous relationship, what would you do? Would you know where to turn? Would you have the resources you needed? Would you have people who believed you and supported you? These are questions we all need to think about, because chances are, you know someone who has experienced domestic violence. It might be a family member, a friend, a coworker, a neighbor. And they might be suffering in silence, afraid to ask for help, afraid of what will happen if they try to leave. We need to create a culture where victims feel safe coming forward, where they have access to resources, where they know they will be believed and protected. If you or someone you know is experiencing domestic violence, please reach out for help. The National Domestic Violence Hotline is available 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. You are not alone. There is help available. And remember, leaving is not weakness. Leaving takes incredible courage. Keisha Williams showed that courage when she walked away from Marcus Johnson and moved back in with her parents. She was trying to protect herself and her children. She was trying to build a better life. And she deserved to be safe. She deserved to live. She deserved to see her children grow up. She deserved to hold her unborn baby in her arms, Marcus Johnson took all of that away from her, and now he will spend the rest of his life behind bars or face execution for his crimes. As we close this story, I want you to take a moment and think about the victims. Think about Keisha Williams and her dreams that will never be fulfilled. Think about her 2 children who are growing up without their mother. Think about her unborn child who never got a chance at life. Think about Lieutenant Patricia Hayes, who died trying to protect her community. Think about Terrell Williams, who has to live with the trauma of watching his sister be murdered and being shot himself. Think about the Williams family, who has to wake up every day knowing their daughter is gone. And then, I want you to think about this. How can we as a society do better? How can we protect victims of domestic violence? How can we prevent tragedies like this from happening again? The answer isn't simple. It requires systemic change. It requires better enforcement of domestic violence laws. It requires more funding for shelters and support services. It requires education and awareness. It requires all of us to take domestic violence seriously and to speak up when we see warning signs. But most importantly, it requires us to believe victims when they come forward, to support them, to help them escape dangerous situations, and to hold perpetrators accountable for their actions. Keisha Williams's story didn't have to end the way it did. She should be here today, watching her children grow up, living her life, pursuing her dreams. But Marcus Johnson made a choice. He chose violence. He chose control. He chose murder. And now he will pay the price. What do you think about this case? Do you believe our justice system does enough to protect victims of domestic violence? What would you do if someone you loved was in Keisha's situation? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. And if this story moved you, please share it. Raise awareness about domestic violence. Let's honor Keisha Williams's memory by making sure her story isn't forgotten. And if you want to hear more true crime stories that shine a light on important issues, make sure you're subscribed to this channel, because these stories matter. These victims matter, and their voices deserve to be heard. Rest in peace, Keisha Williams. Rest in peace, Lieutenant Patricia Hayes. Your lives mattered. Your stories will not be forgotten.